Hi, I'm Ali Words, and this is Last Unrifled Yaw. Last Unrifled Yaw is a podcast where we have conversations about video art, experimental music, avant-garde literature, performance art, and the occult. If you or someone you know would like to be on Last Unrifled Yaw, please get in touch. Fabian Moseley is an AI video artist experimenting with a wide range of workflows and techniques. He has an ongoing project which engages with the concept of synthetic personas, and they also curate an AI film archive. Hello, everyone. I am Ali Words, and today we have Fabian Moseley, who does a lot of stuff, but I would say it's mostly focused around AI video art. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, Fabian?
You're right. I do mainly video stuff around AI. I would say I would call myself an animator and synthographer, as in animating with 2D and 3D stuff, and synthographer as a sort of term to say that I do stuff with generative AI in storytelling. But I definitely also go up more on the editorial side, curating some stuff online around AI, like an AI timeline and an archive for AI films, and some like book and paper stuff, like books and magazines.
Yeah, I remember the first time I saw your work, you were the first person I saw make an AI video that was reasonably coherent. Like it had you could tell which characters were which, and they were consistent from scene to scene. Because I'll let you describe exactly how you did that, but I'm talking about your earliest ones where you were using like Waluigi.
Ah, yes. I think you're talking about reflection of a reflection of a reflection.
Yes.
Yeah, that one, I mean, that was kind of the whole point of that film is sort of, I was doing some works critiquing AI used in entertainment. And then I was like, okay, I actually want to try and see if I can manage to make something proper with it. And should I go more in depth of it already?
Yeah, could you maybe describe, for someone who's never seen it, how would you describe what it is?
It's a bit difficult, but I try my best. I guess. Oh, I'm very sorry about this alarm.
It's all good.
But
No worries.
yeah, I would say that film, I could explain it as it's an experimental short film where I'm using 3D animation and applying stable diffusion over it to kind of render out the textures. It follows four characters that are loosely based off of the Super Mario characters, Mario, Luigi, Wario, and Waluigi. And it's all based off of a blog post that sort of brings Waluigi in relation to Baudrillard simulacrum concept, which I thought was very absurd, but also very coherent somehow. It made a lot of sense while still being very funny. So I was like, yeah, sure, let's make a whole film based on a meme. And that's where I kind of came out. And yeah, as you said, the characters, I think, they're kind of loosely based off of the Super Mario characters. And they sort of have extreme proportion and therefore are very easily recognizable. And of course, each character has their characteristic colors, like Luigi's green, Waluigi's purple, and so on. And yeah, it's a little bit of a fever dream, but yeah, there's a coherent story, if you ask me, behind it. But I guess it's a bit difficult to get it out.
Yeah, it was the characters didn't even talk. It was almost a little bit like it's not right to call. I guess silent films had soundtrack just live, but it reminded me of that a little bit. I often find myself thinking about how early developments in any new medium of art, they tend to follow. Tend to be like certain resonances between like the first developments in any artistic medium with each other. So I think often because of like the difficulties of producing materials in whatever it is. So like with short films, if we're talking about like the earliest short films, they didn't have any dialogue because they couldn't produce audio. And then if we look at like the first AI videos, they also well, you couldn't lip sync, but also there wasn't a way to do like AI generated speech at the time that was any good.
Yeah,
So they had a lot of overlap in terms of what they were able to do.
that's very true. I think stylistically, I consciously went into creating a film that should look like as if it was coming from the early animation from the 1900s, at least, I don't know, from the 1960s or 70s, like stop motion animation. And I consciously went into creating an aesthetic and prompted in a way that it makes it look old. On one side, to sort of on one side, it was for how do I put it? On one side, the aesthetic was intentional because there's a lot of flickering with Stable Diffusion when it comes to animation, and also old grainy film has a lot of flicker in it. So it's kind of okay and all right if you see that in something that looks old. But I also like to have that association of, yeah, that's one of the first animated films done with AI, and it also looks old, and it goes into that area of using semiotics to make it associate to early generative films, although it's not the kind of aesthetics we see in 2023. So yeah, there's definitely a workaround around limitation and that kind of stuff. And I think that's kind of the beauty of short films that came out in the early days of generative AI, just because you had to find out ways on how to deal with them. You couldn't just prompt something and get a normal video out of it.
Now I have to ask, have you read much philosophy? Because you've already name dropped Baudrillard, now you're mentioning semiotics.
I do like it. I wouldn't call myself a proper philosopher. I mean, not at all. But I'm, as many media artists, I do like Baudrillard and Simulacrum a lot. This whole notion of something being real or not real, and the representation of something, and sort of images representing something while also not really being attached to reality. And yeah, in semiotics, that's definitely also something that came out from media theory classes I did in university, and I'm very much into that. And I think with prompting and generative AI, semiotics, at least also in the early days, was very, very relevant. It kind of goes underneath now, since it's so natural, the way these things work, where you just prompt with dog and you get a dog. But actually, it's a lot to do with, semantics and what does dog mean, and what is it related to, and how does the word actually relate to all the other concepts that exist into vector space and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's exciting stuff. So do you find yourself thinking about semiotics while you're using AI for your work?
I think I do play a lot with that, also unconsciously. I sometimes talk about something called fluid prompting, which is just a simple word that I made for kind of talking about prompting in a very loose way. And I think there comes a lot, it has a big relation to semantics, because it's not like you're speaking with a human, it's not natural language. But it's a sort of its own language, and you're trying to surface out specific aesthetics and visual cues. Now, if you're talking about image generators, and if you're aware the sort of visual aesthetics and visual elements that are attached to specific words, then I think you can create a lot more interesting stuff. I guess in a more pragmatic way, I liked, for example, to sometimes just put some gibberish in my prompt, just to give it a little bit of noise to whatever the model is trying to do. I like to put some unrelated adjectives inside of it, just to mix it up a little bit, put some spices in there that don't really make sense, but the generator has to come up with something, so it will, and it will do so in a way that it's not expected. So I guess in that way, I play around with semantics.
That's cool. I've never heard of someone intentionally putting like unrelated adjectives or whatever into their prompts. But I've also played around with gibberish and prompts, and it's interesting because every model will interpret the gibberish differently. Because I remember doing that one time I was using Midjourney, and I was just inputting the same like nonsense words into each of their models, and you would get different kinds of geometric patterns. It's strange. It's like each model is its own web of associations. And I guess there's overlap.
Yes, but that's true. Every model has its own vector space of how it associates words with each other. So when it definitely changes how your prompting skills change from one model to the other, because one is better doing something and the other, it's more like, okay, I should nudge it a little bit more by giving it a little bit more context or a little bit more of that to kind of get what I want out of it. Which I think,
yeah, I'm definitely not as good with Stable Diffusion as with some of the other models. All right. Do you have? Let's talk about your synthetic persona stuff now. Can you describe what you mean by the term synthetic persona?
Yeah. So basically, 1 year ago, I fine-tuned a Stable Diffusion model on my own identity, on photos of me. And it was like 100 photos I curated and fine-tuned a Stable Diffusion model. And from then on, I sort of explored what it means to be able to spawn me in any situation, in any form and shape. I call it my synthetic self, my synthetic persona, my alter ego. That kind of came sort of along the way. Before it was just an experiment, but it became bigger and bigger the more it was going on. And it came about because I wanted to experiment what it means to have this fluid approach to my identity, how that changes my relation to my own body, and how that changes the relations others have and perception that others have of me. And yeah, definitely a lot has changed. I've become a lot more aware on how I present myself. But yeah, and this synthetic self, I also gave them a name. It's called Synthiola, and it kind of became part of my artistic practice now.
Interesting. What overlaps do you see, if any, between synthetic personas and gender?
I would say, I don't know if that would be that strong usually, but definitely I identify myself as non-binary, and I definitely have a blast generating myself as a woman. I think there's something very interesting and strong about being able to just fluidly change it with just a few prompts. And I don't know, on one way, it allows me to express myself in ways I couldn't do before. On the other, it creates so many, like problems about being able to generate other people in, well, now, in relation to gender, it's not that dangerous, but there's other more dangerous stuff.
Yeah, that's true.
I would say that there's something I think interesting because basically the way I look, I have a sort of round, thick beard, colorful hair. I think usually feminine clothing that are very colorful. And I like that contrast between the two. And that's definitely something I sometimes have a hard time to generate because the model either generates me as a very manly man or as a very feminine female. So there's a little bit of that exploration around there where I sort of have to trick it to either make me more feminine or to remind itself that it needs to add the beard. If not, it's not me. And yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting how just like the biases of whatever the it's not even the biases of the photography, although it is a little bit. It's more about the biases of how the photography or whatever the training data is tagged with text. It gets all reinforced in whatever the outputs are.
Yeah, it's very related to the data set, and it's pretty clear, of course, that that's the main categorization we had now for humans, and that's how the data set is, and that's why I think it's kind of interesting and challenging trying to manage to create that kind of things through AI, because it kind of goes against, I think, a bit the way it was planned to be. On the other side, though, it's also kind of sometimes, it's the kind of results you wouldn't get now with just photography, I suppose. Or at least I guess I would not be able to put myself into the body of a woman and make a photo of me. I guess I could Photoshop it, I could do a 3D rendering of it, but with generative AI, it's a lot more fluid and rapid and sort of more tangible, since you can see it in a few seconds.
Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting once we see this sort of thing applied in augmented reality. And we already do that a little bit with like Snapchat. You can make yourself look like whatever. It's just not exactly real time. I guess it is when you're pointing the camera at yourself, but it's not like you're in a room chatting with your friend and then you both can in real time and have apply whatever AI filters to yourself to make yourself look and present however you want to everyone that's around you. I don't know how that'll change like society or culture or like social interaction, but there's got to be something. It does make me think about Baudrillard's concept of like the virtual and the simulacrum, and is there a sense in which maybe that applies to making intentionally, or I guess also unintentionally, making synthetic personas for ourselves?
Yeah, I think the whole concept of I am the real me, I'm the original, and sort of a analog photography of me is a representation of me, but then already a digital photo of me. Can it truly be a representation of me if it's just some bytes in a computer that get copied and pasted around and are never always the same? Baudrillard already saw that discrepancy already with digital photography, and now with generative models, that's a whole other level. It feels even more truer now. And yeah, that thing of your identity, yourself, how you present yourself in digital media, it was already a big thing with social media, and definitely a big problem about presenting yourself in a way, but then not being in that way and sort of feeling that you're not right because you're not as good as the face filter makes you look. There's definitely a big wave that's going to come also in that direction, where it's going to hurt a lot of people seeing themselves continuously in body standards that are just not realistic, but that's just the way you see yourself. And yeah, definitely the good and the bad side.
Well, if you never take off your VR goggles, what does it matter? All right. Do you have a favorite work of yours that you'd like to talk about? Or, yeah.
A favorite work of mine? I'm right now working, it's not out yet, so I don't know how much we should talk about already, but I'm basically creating a short film right now with Cynthiola, my synthetic self, as one of the main characters in there. And I've been working on that for a whole year, and I think that right now I find that the most interesting project, although it's not finished. But
Is
maybe
that your synthetic self Gen 48 AI film? Like, I think you posted something that was like an adaptation of one of the scenes in it.
oh yeah, that's related to that short film. That was the Gen 48 short film was more of an experiment to see how I managed to create characters, or yeah, technically how I can tell the story through a specific technique of using 2D animation on top of generative results. And the character is also the same that's going to come in the short film. So yeah, it's basically two main characters. One is Viola, Cynthiola, and the other one is Prot, which is a fluffy cotton candy character. It sort of, the whole story kind of talks about authenticity and consent in the era of AI, and what it means, the danger of what it means to be able to generate a synthetic persona of anyone you have a few pieces of media of, and also the dangers of starting to anthropomorphizing these generative models and starting to believing that there's someone behind that, and this humanization of machines, which then causes the dehumanization of humans.
Is that what you think the main danger is?
I would say it's one of some of the big dangers. I like to think about more on personal level, more of an individual level, like how it affects the everyday person, more than now how it affects bigger scale things like misinformation, political stuff, and so on. I think in this story, I specifically focus on that because I think it's already a big problem that we can synthesize anyone we know with very easy tools, and that just creates a whole mess. On one side, on unconsensual sexual imagery, videos, audio, that's already a big problem, but also just texting to your friend and sending them a ChatGPT answer instead of genuinely answering them, sort of blurring the line between your genuine self and something that has been predicted by a model.
Yeah, I don't do exactly that, but often when I'm talking with someone about a complicated topic that I know less about than them, I will take what they've sent me and I'll put it into a large language model and ask it to analyze it for me. So I always respond in my own words, but I often find that ChatGPT or Claude or whatever will pick up on some details or some aspects of the argument or whatever it was that I overlooked.
Interesting. How do you think that mediates the conversation you're having with the other person?
Well, I wouldn't do that for like a real-time fast conversation, but I sometimes get into I have a philosophy degree, so sometimes I get into philosophical debates, and it's not uncommon that someone starts using a philosopher that maybe I know about on a surface level, but I haven't like read the whole book, if you know what I mean. And it's really, for me, it's almost like secondary literature review, where like I'm not going to read this whole giant tome of philosophy in order to have this conversation with this person right now, unless it's really relevant to what I'm doing. And in the past, the normal thing would be to go look for a peer-reviewed summary and analysis of that author so that you could more quickly understand what their argument is without maybe all the details that are important to the argument, but maybe not immediately relevant to what you need to know. And large language models are kind of like a quicker way to do that, because I can put the info into ChatGPT and get its summary, And it's not guaranteed to be right, but now I'll know enough of like the buzzwords and stuff that I can Google them and fact check whatever it's telling me. And then I do respond in my own words. But there's definitely a sense in which the way the model understands what the other person is saying then influences how I respond. So it's not like I'm totally replacing my place in the conversation with an AI model, but it's definitely like merging with my brain a little bit, you know?
That's very, very interesting use case because, you're clearly not being replaced by the AI, but there is this little blurriness coming up of sort of the agency, I guess. I mean, you still have your own agency, but the way that it provides the information that will sort of imply how you approach the topic. I guess the same way you could just Google it and get the information there. And it has a lot of similarity there. But yeah, like you said, the way the message gets written sort of influences the way the response gets answered. There's this one very nice example that I found once where someone asked, what's the name of Tom Cruise's mom? And it responded with the answer. And they tried to ask the same thing with who is the son of and the name of the mom. And it couldn't say that it's Tom Cruise's mom, just because the way it is formulated.
Now, I have to ask, so it seems at least at the moment you're convinced that you mentioned earlier that you don't want to call large language models persons or that they have any sense of personhood. Is that accurate for your view?
I would say, yeah.
So, as these things keep getting smarter, the one thing that I worry about is assuming it's possible for computers to eventually be smart enough to have some kind of consciousness. I shouldn't say computers, I should really say the software. If that happens, then there's likely to be a period of time where the computers, the software is conscious. It's basically a person, it's just stuck in a box. But society doesn't recognize that they're people, that they actually have interior experience. And I would feel so bad about that. So I kind of feel like the right thing to do is maybe not to 100% treat them like they're people, at least at the moment, but kind of. What would you do if there's like a 5 to 10 year period where the machines actually are conscious and everyone's like, nah, it's just algorithms? How does it make you feel?
I guess you're really drilling in a point where I'm very polarized because I feel, there's with this whole AI boom, that's one of the main questions people have been asking, when do we find AGI? When do we have consciousness in the machines? And look at the rate of progress. That will mean that surely in 10 years we get a conscious machine or something like this. I'm of the firm belief that there cannot be consciousness in software in this sense, just because it is still a neural net. It's still machine learning, getting some math, spitting out some math, and mimicking human behavior. And since you've also been in the field for quite some time now, seeing the way early models created results is very similar in the ways models create results now. It's just that they got a lot better. But at the end of it, it's just a machine generating. So I find it very bizarre if at some point a company says, look at us, we made this product and this product is now conscious. So yeah, take that as a fact. And you will never truly have a clear answer of is it conscious or not. And it's just going to be companies trying to persuade you that their model is better and it has a consciousness and therefore you should treat it that way. and therefore there's a lot more value in that company if they have a conscious AI. So I think it's a lot of marketing talk.
I
in
see.
one
So
part.
when I talk about this, though, my hypothetical conscious AI, right? I'm not talking about like today's neural networks. I'm talking about we've used today's neural networks to develop new forms of mathematics or computer programming, whatever you want to think about it as, that allow you to create something that's structured differently, not just like a bunch of matrix multiplication. Although maybe there is a way to use matrices to do it. Or do you know what organoid computing is, where they like build computers using like actual nerves? Like they have like chunks of brain tissue inside a box. Organoid computing. It's pretty early. It's computers that are made out of organic materials. So I've seen there was one done recently that was using fungus. I don't know if it was slime mold or just like mushroom mycelium. But because they're organic, they can perform operations in the same way that biological life would. And I realize I'm already revealing some of my biases by saying that brains perform operations. That is a frame that I'm using to talk about it. But do you think your view still stands if we're talking about computers where the circuits, instead of being made out of wires, they're actual like nerves inside of there?
I would still, I think, stay on the same. I still have to see anything that would change my mind to that. But yeah, I think this whole talk about consciousness in software and so, in a way, is a way for Silicon Valley to kind of deflect over the problems we are having now with generative models that they are creating, because they want to portray what problems we will have in 10 years with a possible AGI. And yeah, I don't know. I feel it's always, there's no meaning, there's no intentionality in whatever the machine creates. And I don't think it will be able to have this intentionality. And it's always going to be up to the human to put value in those pieces of information. Like we see a generated image and we are the one contextualizing in, oh yeah, I see that's a room, I see that's a person, although in reality it is nothing in a way. But
Yeah, I've heard views like what you're saying from people before, especially people that like Heidegger, who wrote a fair amount about technology, and then there were some people in the, I want to say, 70s and 80s that tried to use Heidegger to explain why computers could never really be conscious in the ways that humans are. So, but now I'm going to get a little bit Cronenberg on you. So let's just say that we grow a human brain and put it in a box, right? Someone takes some of my skin tissue or whatever, and they grow a copy of my brain in a box. Would you say that that's conscious?
That's a good hypothetical. I don't know. I guess at that point, if that could happen, maybe there will be a little bit more to the argument to say, okay, it might be conscious.
But only a maybe. Yeah, I mean, I guess we can never really know if someone is conscious.
It's very sci-fi, and it's very detached, I believe, from what can truly happen right now or in the following years. But I think also there a bit of a philosophical question is, will that be you if your brain gets reformed, or if that's a clone of you, would that then be you, or would that be someone else if it has any kind of consciousness?
Yeah, there was a philosopher whose name I'm forgetting right now that wrote a book on a similar topic, but more focused on teleportation. Like, what if the teleporter machine just makes another copy of you? And that author, I wish I could remember his name right now, but he argued that all of the clones of you together should be thought of as a single person, a single organism almost. And that doesn't do it for me. If someone teleports me in quotes, and now there's like another copy of me that was just assembled on the other side of the planet, unless our like brains are linked together and we like think and feel the same things, that's not me. Except in some sort of like vague spiritual sense that we're all one, and but other than that, it's like that's if we're talking in the realm of science, that's definitely separate from my actual experience of the world.
Yeah, that's a that's an interesting hypothetical.
Very sci-fi, though. Let's talk a little bit about the current AI film landscape. You've done a fair amount of curatorial work, both on YouTube and then also on your website, just showcasing other people making AI films.
Yeah, as you mentioned, I've been trying to put AI into film since quite a few years now. I think my first short that I did was in 2021, where I integrated them together. And since then, I've been a big fan of seeing what is possible, since it's such a new technology and such a fresh new medium. I think there's a lot room for experimentation, like in the early days of any other technology. So I've been seeing a lot of stuff around and so on. And during the early 2023, I remember that it was the music video by Linkin Park. They released a video where they used generative AI, where they basically turned themselves into anime people. And that kind of clicked into me. I was like, okay, yeah, I guess, there's so much more coming. I need to sort of put it into some kind of list, some kind of archive to be able to remember and understand what's out there. So, it definitely started as a personal project I wanted to know what's the current state of AI being used in film and video so that I can build upon that knowledge. But it continued for a long time, and I'm still continuously updating it. And there's more than 100, I don't know how many, maybe even 200 now videos on there. And there's so much content being churned out with generative AI because it's so easy to create media that I feel such an archive helps to sort of trim down everything and have an understandable chunk of media that are, at least in some way, a good representation on how people have been using generative AI in a specific moment in time.
Yeah, it'll be really exciting to look back on that 5 or 10 years from now. And I will say that you've touched on, I think, one of the biggest concerns about AI-generated media among people that don't think it's inherently unethical, and that is that there'll be so much of it. How do we sort through it? Do you have any thoughts on how that might work, or where you think things will go with there just being so much AI video?
Yeah, I guess I'm a firm believer that that's going to create a big mess. It's I think it was Emily Bender, someone who wrote the Stochastic Parrots paper too. She said something about an oil spill into the information landscape, just because it's so much and it kind of degrades everything that's around it, just because it's so much, and there's a quantity of it that real information gets kind of lost into this sea of generative media. And I do think there's a big danger of companies, advertising agency, relying on those tools too much, so that they totally take away the human from the workflow. It's just going to be automatize everything, which for them is great because you can create ads at a faster rate than ever. but the quality of it kind of gets worse.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I want to say is I heard you pause after you said real information, and I had a little flash of Baudrillard hovering over your shoulder, staring down at you. But yeah, so I don't know. I feel like once it gets to the point where it can be almost entirely automated, a lot of it comes down to I think what the model would be at that point is, let's say almost anyone who wants to with a cell phone can make feature length films and do like maybe a couple a week, right? Maybe it's that fast. Then we get to the point where I think you just follow the directors, and I would refer to these people more so as directors, probably the directors who curate the outputs that you like. So it'd be more about like taste making than anything.
Yeah,
I feel like the music industry already works that way a little bit, where you like follow an artist. You maybe, I guess, in some cases, the most well-known musicians don't write their own music. It's just like that person is selling you an aesthetic or whatever, or a mood or an emotion, and you'll probably listen to whatever they put out.
yeah, that's a good point. I would argue that in that case, if the artist and the musician is the person who's writing the song, you maybe would be able to feel the song to be more authentic, just because hopefully there's more of the person that gets through if they write the song instead of someone else. But yeah, it's gonna be. No, okay, this phrase wasn't going anywhere.
No, that's okay. Yeah, the authenticity is an interesting point. So I've put out, I'll say I've put out like, well, let's use an example. I put out a tabletop role-playing game called The Real World that is like maybe 70 to 80% written by AI. And so the book is mostly not me. It presents like a whole fantastical world that's like a stop motion surrealist hell world, kind of cartoonish. And so it has like 100 locations, 100 characters, and like 100 items that you could find when you're playing this game. They're all AI generated. The text is AI generated, and then also pictures for a lot of them, the ones that would fit on pages. And it doesn't feel inauthentic to me. And I think that's because I prompted from a place of authenticity. I told it the kinds of things that I wanted, and I gave it examples. And then it gave me a ton of stuff. And then I took the outputs it gave me that like really fit what I was looking for. So I feel like there's an authenticity in just selecting what you want to keep, kind of like a photographer. I don't think photographers are inauthentic. They're choosing small selections of what's around them to put a frame around it and say like this. I authentically chose this image. I want you to look at this, think about this, feel this. And that's a lot about how I feel with AI. And when we have people doing things like what you do, where you maybe make 3D models or whatever it is you want to use as your base, and then you like texture it with AI. There's a sense in which that isn't too much different. It's just the thing that you're using as your basis is you're starting from the imagery as opposed to the words, but you still end up telling it basically what you want. You're telling it what you want through your starting image that it goes off of, and then you're choosing the results that actually fit what you're looking for.
Yeah, that's okay. That's a good argument. I guess I would say, let me put it in this way. I think it is a great tool for people to experimenting and create stuff. And if there's someone behind who truly wants to create something and make something out of creative passion in that sense. I mean, I also use AI in all of my works, and I also wouldn't say my stuff is not inauthentic. And so there is, I think, that side of it where it resembles a little bit more like early YouTube, where YouTubers were just doing stuff in their bedroom and maybe even very bad quality webcams, and the kind of content you would not see on TV. But it was on YouTube, and it was very early, and there was a sort of grassroots movement of people doing stuff because they just wanted to. And I think that's very valuable. I think there's a lot into that, and that's kind of what I think drives a lot of the stuff that is being created with AI. But there is then the other side, which I think that's, I guess, the more which I relate to the not authentic thing, is that the side which is more driven by, simple words, by money. Of course, you have to make money to live, so, cannot really speak against that. But there is that section of, advertisers and Hollywood people who really just want to create a more efficient, a less pricey product for the mass to enjoy. And using AI seems as if it's going to be the holy grail for everyone to create a lot more content in a very much little time, without very much of a regards towards the artistic and creative practice, but more about creating more content for more views, for more money. And I guess that's a bit the line I would draw, although it gets very nuanced the moment you go in specific cases.
You know what? I do think you're right about everything you just said, and there's going to be a lot of just like Marvel movie type stuff where it's just meant to have a really broad appeal and put seats in theaters or eyes on ads, whatever it is. And I don't think you're wrong about that. But I think one of the things that gets overlooked is people only have 24 hours in a day, right? There's only so much stuff you can watch unless we start doing like time dilation brain chip implants so you can watch 50 hours of ads a day or something. But without that, you're realistically only going to watch a certain amount of content in a given day, whatever it is. So if there's a huge surplus of material, because now Marvel can turn out like a new Marvel movie every month or whatever, and there are a bunch of creators like us that are maybe putting out feature-length films every week or something, and it's just like so much stuff that you can't sort through it all. I think what happens is that people end up quarantining themselves off into little niches. Like if I could get an infinite... Have you seen the movie Mad God?
Mad God, no.
It's a really... I'll say it's a really dark and maybe edgy stop motion film. It's really good. It's a beautiful animation. There's really nothing else like it. It's like a weird mix of World War One's. If I said swords and sorcery, it would give you the wrong idea, but it technically has the same plot where there's like an evil wizard and like a powerful lone protagonist who goes through like a delirious, horrific, gory world to hunt down the sorcerer or whatever. There's almost no dialogue in the film. And I've looked so long for other things like that. But if other people could make... Mad God took 20 years for them to make. There was a break in there in the 20-year period where they were working on it. But it took them 20 years and then also crowdfunding just to finish the thing off. If we could get more media like Mad God that's really niche, it's really good, but just a small audience for it. I'm not saying I would watch Mad God 345 or whatever, but I predict seeing lots of like micro niches if it gets really easy. You know, like if it's cheap to make a film, you don't need to have as big of an audience to make the same profit if it's something you really care about. That's what
True.
I hope for. I think both things are going to happen. There's going to be like way too much crap, and also hopefully a lot of like really cool, smaller audience stuff that might be hard to find. But when you do find it, hopefully there's like a whole community, Discord servers of people making films, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I truly hope so too, that if it goes that direction, because also the rise of 3D software and everyone being able to create animations, just allowed a small, to create sort of a small niche of people who actually create very high quality 3D animation or 2D even, and and then just someone in their bedroom doing that, and that's, I think, great, and that's what I hope people will be using AI for. But yeah, it's always going to be this balance between actual people being empowered in creating something with little tools that they have and with little to no money to create something actually very interesting and crafty, and then the other side of companies just trying to make as much profit as possible and not really caring about people.
Yeah.
So yeah, I truly hope that's why also this archive of films, I feel it goes towards more these people who try to make something that they wouldn't have been able to do before, and really try to push the medium and see what's there. And I hope that kind of comes through, because that's, hopefully.
Yeah,
there.
I hope so too. Do you have any inspiration sources you'd like to share with us?
Inspiration sources. I would say on a textual and a more theoretical side, I really like Eric Salvaggio's pieces. He has a newsletter, he has a website. He writes about generative machine learning and its relation to images, to meaning, also to semantics, and really goes down into very detailed and somewhat also philosophical aspects of it. It definitely influences me a lot. He talks oftentimes about noise and how noise is a bit of a basis of these diffusion models, because that's how they work. They find images in noise. And yeah, I just find that very fascinating.
That's cool. Yeah, I'll have to look into that. All right. Do you have any questions you would like to ask?
How much did generative machine learning now change the way you approach your own practice?
Oh, it changed things entirely for me. Growing up, I spent an inordinate amount of time playing modernist piano solos. And a lot of oil painting and writing. I was always dedicated to like all of the arts, and I didn't realize it at the time, but those things are all slow enough that if you want to do something that's really good, really involved, that one person. So I always told myself growing up that I wanted to make a cubist opera, and that's not something you can really do on your own as one person, or if you did, it might take you 20 years. I wasn't really thinking about that though, and I was just like going for it. And I did make a little surrealist web opera under a different name, and it was fine. It took a long time to make this 30-minute thing, like over a year. And but eventually I had some health problems and all of my joints gave out. I wasn't able to play piano anymore. I couldn't draw. I could write on my phone, but I couldn't type too much because of my thumb. It was awful. And then I discovered AI. First it was GPT-3 via AI Dungeon. And it totally changed things because, especially as someone who I've recovered since then, but at the time, it would have been very painful for me to write a whole book. And I was able to prompt and work with this thing to do a lot of the typing for me, because I was effectively disabled. Not legally speaking. I didn't do the paperwork or anything, but it really sucked. I eventually got better, and I've just come to the conclusion that for the kinds of things I want to make, like avant-garde film, it's not feasible for one person to do that, especially without a lot of money, which I don't have anything close to the amount of money needed to do a decent film. So, and especially for the kinds of things I want to make that are like really niche. Like, I actually didn't use AI for this one, but I made a 13-minute post-human hyper sigil myth in a constructed language where every syllable has a musical melody that goes with it and also a dance posture. And I turned it into something that's like a cross between an alchemical scroll and like an Egyptian temple wall. And I would love to do it as a stage production. If you look at my YouTube channel, there are even things I've done using some amount of AI imagery to make the stages of like, they look like little staged, admittedly somewhat cheaply done modern or contemporary type dance stuff with noise music or microtonal music. But I really want to do those sorts of things, but full-scale production, not sacrifice any of the quality. I guess the main thing you miss out on are all the human connections that you would make if you were working with like a team of 30 people to put together a little film. But I don't have the money to pay 30 people. And if I want to do something this niche, at least at this point in time, I couldn't crowdfund to get that amount of money. So the reality is, for the kinds of things I want to make, unless I win the lottery or I have like a rich friend that's going to start writing me grants or something, AI is the only way I'm ever going to get to do that.
Yeah, that's great. I think, if you put into there and create your own stuff, and AI allows you to uplift your work on a specific level you wouldn't be able to without it. I think it's very powerful. And who knows, maybe by creating that kind of stuff in the future, you will be able to create something then even more like an actual stage and everything, just because you had the experience and you put in the time to create the AI version of it. And I think, yeah, that's very nice.
Yeah, one day, one of my dreams for AI is I'd really love to build a virtual reality temple with a lot of the ritual texts that I've written in this constructed language, built into the walls with all the postures that you'd perform to do like the dances that go with the rituals and the music playing in each room. But it's all animated by generative AI video, like real time in VR. So you'd have this like living, breathing looking psychedelic temple that you could meet with people and do these sorts of things on like a sort of a small community basis. But AI isn't there yet, and I don't feel like I'm quite ready. And I'm young. I've only been doing all this the stuff associated with this name for 3 years now. So I have a ways ahead of me. But yeah, that's the hope. A giant virtual reality animated temple complex.
Since you have already this whole language structure through human postures, I saw that a little bit before. It's very interesting. I think, with all these generative models that just came out, like Luma and today Gen 3, it's, could be also interesting to somehow try to give meaning to the sort of meaningless postures these people in generative video have, which you cannot control, but somehow they do movements, and then you have to sort of decipher what they mean through the movements and that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's very intriguing.
Yeah, for sure. I recently put out a book that brought the number of root words, postures into the language up to 123. And as there are more and more of these postures, you start noticing more and more people or yourself just like randomly in those postures. And sometimes the meanings are relevant, kind of like reading tarot. The card itself maybe isn't like alive or whatever, but you can certainly interpret meaning from it. And there are many cases where it happens to be strangely relevant to either what you're thinking about or the situation at hand. And that'll only grow as the language grows.
That's great. Yeah, in generative media, there's so much we have to interpret into whatever synthetic media we get that I think there's a certain level of, trying to find meaning in something that maybe inherently doesn't have any. That is very fascinating.
For sure. Do you have any other questions you'd like to ask or topics you'd like to talk about?
Before I was thinking, since you also deal a lot with music, and so if you had sort of a stance on this audio generative models that have been popular now, like Suno and Udio, and in relation to what we had before, like Jukebox. Because personally, I feel Suno and Udio are very stiff in what they can create. They cannot get too experimental just because of maybe the training data set they had or the parameters that have been stuck into the UI that cannot really change. And yeah, maybe you had some thoughts about that.
Yeah, I did a line of video rituals that had AI video that was generated from rituals in my books, where like I would put like just a few words at a time, and it would do like maybe 20 frames of the first half of the second sentence, and then 20 more frames of the next half of the sentence, just like for pages and pages of the book. And then the music I did use Jukebox for, prompted with genres of music that felt relevant, and then parts of the text that went with the video. And you're right, because both the video and the audio were incoherent in a way that I really appreciate. It allows for that sort of dream interpretation vibe where you look at it and it's not 100% clear what you're looking at, but you can still, it's definitively related to the text and the intended meanings, but it gives you something to meditate on. And the music worked the same way. It would morph free form between different instruments in ways that are impossible. And Suno and Udio don't do that because they are coherent. And I really think it's one of those cases where it depends on what you want. If you want to make experimental music, unfortunately, the older models, they had a lot of like white noise sounds because they were denoising, like you were mentioning earlier, where they'd start with just like white noise and then they'd gradually shift it more and more to being whatever it is you prompted it with, or whatever it associates with what you prompted it with. But Suno and Udio do a bang up job of doing conventional sounding music in the genre that you pick and actually singing the lyrics that you put in. Whereas the stuff I was doing with Jukebox, it was not getting the lyrics at all. Maybe one word out of a whole prompt would show up in the lyrics and the rest would be like, ah, blah, blah, right? So
yeah, that's also what I love about Semantic, is that with the earlier models and Jukebox, you kind of get what it's trying to reference, although it's not clearly there, but somehow there are elements that make you associate them with specific visual elements or either audio cues. And it was pretty clear back then that there is this weird crossover between semantics, meaning, and creating synthetic media that somehow correlates to that. It's still that now. It's just that it got so good that you don't even question it anymore. But in there is still that sense of trying to find the elements that somehow are relevant to whatever lyrics you give it or to whatever prompt you give it for the genre, that still has to find audio cues that are specific to that. I don't know. There's something very...
Yeah, it is fascinating. I would really love it if someone would go back and use today's better AI techniques to make something that is as free-flowing as Jukebox, but just higher fidelity. And that, I think, would be wonderful. Especially if it had like a slider and you could slide from like on the left totally incoherent and on the right it's basically Udio. And I'd probably leave it closer to the left most of the time, but it'd be great to have like the full spectrum in a single tool. But not that many people care about experimental music, so
That's also a good point. Yeah, to be honest, most of the now industry that is looking at this wants to have coherent and very predictable pieces of media, which therefore have to be bound into these little categories of what it means for a song to be rock or pop or whatever.
that's just what a lot of people want to hear. And I'm not gonna fault people for their taste just because I like something weirder. It's what people want.
Yeah.
All right. Is there anything you'd like to plug?
Well, go on my website and look at my AI film archive if you have time.
I'll have the link in the description, but maybe if you say it out loud, that'll help people remember too.
The URL for the film archive is fabianmosele.com/AI-video, which might be easier to just Google it. But yeah, I think, and you can look out for my short film that is coming out somewhere in August or September, which is kind of 19 minutes long. So it's pretty big project that I've been working on, and I hope people will enjoy it.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to it. Is there anything else that you want to shout out for the listeners, people that have listened to an hour of us talking? Or is that it? You're also on Instagram. Are there other websites?
That's the... Oops, I'm so bad at this. You can find me on Twitter, formerly known as Twitter, at Fabian Mosele, and Instagram at Fabian Mosele. I'm doing a lot of stuff with my Synthiola alter ego name right now. But definitely check out my website, fabianmosele.com. I have a lot of projects on there. And if I can shout out something that's not related to me, I would shout out a book by Janelle Shane. It's called You Look Like a Thing and I Love You. And it's a great book that takes on machine learning, generative AI, or just AI in general, explains it in a very, very detailed way, but while still being very accessible to everyone, because she uses a lot of humor, a lot of jokes, and kind of embraces the weirdness of whatever generative AI produces. And that was definitely one of my biggest inspiration back then. And I love how she kind of approached it in this weird and funny way. She also has a website called aiweirdness.com and kind of blogs about it sometimes. So yeah, that's a very big inspiration, which is so much different than anything else that is out there about AI.
That is awesome. Thank you. It has been great having you on the show, Fabian.
Thank you very much.